I'm not a really great investor. What I'm very good at is figuring out a trend or an area to be in and finding the right people to do that. A bubble can actually be a great thing if controlled properly. Israel's very good at 30-year out research, winning a Nobel Prize. Israel has not been great about what's needed 5 to 15 years out. We all say, democracy is the best system out there. Sometimes it's not. Sometimes a long-term plan controlled by one person has a greater outcome. It's just reality. What's happening technology-wise in Riyadh is incredible. At Harvard, you hear about the jubilation of October 7th, but I come to Saudi Arabia and I hear the tragedy of October 7th.
Why is there nothing about you on social media?
I pay a service to make sure there's nothing about me on social media or Google or anything, so I was happy to hear that it was hard to find stuff. It's like we're sitting here, we're Statler and Waldorf, as I want to watch the Muppet Show, sitting here and making fun of everybody and everything.
Welcome back to Invested. This is going to be a very fun episode of Invested for at least 3 reasons. And number 1, I have a froggy in my throat and I'm a little hoarse. Number 2, I'm here with Sender Cohn, who we know each other since we're teenagers, which is a long time. And although he has lapped me a few times professionally, he used to work for me at one point. Maybe we'll get into that. And lastly, we started off kibitzing off camera about Houthi branding, the Hootie's Christmas branding. And maybe we'll get to dig into that too and find the clip, because I think we were recording when you were talking about the Hootie's branding.
Were we?
And bring it back.
Oh, dear. Okay.
And this is also Sender's first podcast, so join me in giving him a round of applause for agreeing to do his first podcast. Welcome, Sender.
Thank you.
Okay, so for the audience who doesn't know Sender as long as I do, Sender Cohn is currently the managing partner of KH2 Capital and the chairman of Nevo Labs. All that we'll get into. He is also the chairman of Fulbright Israel for the last 8 months.
18 months.
18 months. Last 18 months. He's the previous chief investment officer of the Schusterman family. Before that, he was the director of research and head of external allocations at Soros. And before that, he worked at Duquesne with the famous Stan Druckenmiller, one of the greatest investors of all time, if not the greatest investor of all time. He's a trustee of the Harlem Children's Zone, a trustee emeritus of Yeshiva University. At our age, you can be an emeritus already. That's quite amazing. And was a founding trustee of the Birthright Israel Foundation. Did I miss anything?
I think you know more about me than I do, so that's good.
So before that, Sender was also the news editor of the college newspaper when I was the editor-in-chief.
And then he promoted me to editor-in-chief when he left.
That is exactly right. You earned the right to be the editor-in-chief.
I earned the right,
yeah. Of the commentator. So just for the audience who doesn't know you, how do we know? How did we first meet? Make sure you're talking to the microphone.
Sorry. We first met. I came to New York from Cincinnati, Ohio. I was born and grew up in Cincinnati. I came to New York to go to yeshiva. My brother had gone to Skokie, which which is in Chicago. Yes. And my parents thought Skokie was a little bit nutty, might be the word. It had a certain reputation as a free-for-all yeshiva, so they figured they would send me to another yeshiva with the door, not realizing they were sending me to what can be best described as a Lord of the Flies scenario at the MTA dormitory. But when you live in Cincinnati and it's pre-social media and pre-iPhones and pre-everything else, that's what happens. So I had a very lovely time in MTA. I met Michael. I met his cousin. I spent much time going to various people's homes, just because I didn't have much family in New York other than a sister. It was great. It was a great experience. Most of my friends come from those high school days, like Michael. So it was all worth it, even though I had a C- average in high school because I missed 3 finals and got 3 Fs because I went to a Billy Joel concert instead of taking those 3 finals.
All right. So we always start with the question of what is your core personal value?
Core personal value. Just being a good person. I guess that's...
Are you succeeding at that?
I don't know.
I think you are.
I think we find out. There's a great quote at the end of... has anyone here read Middlemarch?
I have not.
The last page of Middlemarch has... And I'm not going to remember it to say the phrase, but I love George Eliot. In large part because she wrote Daniel Deronda, which helped create British Zionism or helped create more enthusiasm for Zionism. But the last page of Middlemarch is a beautiful quote about unmarked graves of people who just make the world a little bit of a better place.
That's very nice.
But it's a great end sentence if anyone's bored and wants
So
to
Middle
Google it.
March is like the end of your life, and Lord of the Flies is the beginning of your life.
Yeah, that's
Yeah.
a good way to phrase it. Yeah, yeah.
Um, I want to start with a question that was really, what did you learn most from Stan Druckenmiller?
Uh, what did I learn most from Stan Druckenmiller? I'd say most importantly to be a good person. He's a very good person. He's very shy. He's very he's not good in front of a room, but he doesn't take credit for many of the things he's accomplished in life, both philanthropically and investing wise. Um, but he's just as an investor, he's very good at quickly pivoting when he's made a mistake.
Meaning cutting his losses and
He
moving
cuts
on.
his losses very quickly. People will watch him on TV and they think he's always bearish and they think he's like, "Oh, he said this, so therefore I'm short." And the funny part is think he's always bearish and like listening to what he says and trying to do based on what he said in an interview the week prior on TV is the man never has had a down year. And I think he's been investing for 37, 38 years. He's never lost money in a year. So clearly he's not always bearish because the market's up 95% of the time or whatever it is. But also he's very quick to adjust, which is phenomenally hard for a person to do to uh to take a loss and move on. And he's exquisitely good at that,
When we had dinner with Stan here in Tel Aviv,
which was
uh,
a lot of fun. Michael hosted a dinner for Stan on his first trip to Israel, which was a very magical trip.
I was blown away by the number of questions he asked over dinner. Accomplished person, and I felt like he was constantly questioning his assumptions. And then later, I heard him say that he gets up in the morning and has a call like at 5:30 in the morning of like, okay, what's changed today? I thought, is that something you picked up from him? Is that something that's actually real?
It's real. I wish I'd picked that up from him. He's very inquisitive. He's constantly looking for new data points, and he's also very good at distilling things down. You know, it's like having a great teacher knows how to make something very simple. And what I always loved about him is a macro concept is very simple. You know exactly how he's thinking and what he's doing by talking to him, and clearly the machinations in his brain are incredibly complex. But you know, all my years at Soros, there were always people would come in with this macro theory or that macro theory or wanting us to invest in this macro trade or that macro trade. And the way I'd evaluate things in the first stage was when people were complicated is Stan says something to me and I understand it right away. These guys are talking and it's taking me a half hour and I still don't understand what they're saying. They're clearly not better than he is because they're not, and they're so complicated. Like, and that just it was a great first filter to move on, and it was always right to move on. But he's just very very simple in how he approached things. But again, it's not a simple brain; it's a simple articulation of a concept.
And a move and a trend. Like,
Yeah,
I saw him right after the Millet thing say, okay, I got to buy some stock in Argentina just to get some skin in the game. I'm going to start and then get going. It was like simple. The guy's going to come figure something out here.
yeah.
Um, what's something that you've managed to distill down to something simple?
Well, these are these a simple question should beget a very simple quick answer. Um, just Just trend following. I think the one thing that I've gotten from him is the ability, oh, not as well as he does by any way, shape, or form, is I'm very good at looking at patterns. My kids always find it inexplicable that I'm very bad at math, which I am, but I'm very good at looking at numbers and figuring out patterns in a trend or a graph or a model, et cetera, et cetera.
And so what's something that you can distill down now for us into a simple thought on start with an investment?
Start with investment. Just looking at this country, there's a simple thought is one of the reasons that I've been coming back and forth is the simple thought of uh, why Dubai and not Tel Aviv? Looking at what's happening in this country and why more is not happening here in alternative asset management.
Which we're going to dig into a lot in a second, but I want to build our way there. So you also work for George
That was
Soros.
a good segue, right? Like,
It was a good. It was good.
and I,
You also spent years at George Soros.
yep.
What's the big thing you took away from him?
The great similarity that George and Stan have is they're both able to distill things down to a very simple concept. The big difference between George and Stan, I think it was actually Scott Bessent who said this, to
Now nominated
paraphrase
to be
him,
the
Treasury Secretary. And I think you heard Scott at the last, we're about to host something together. The last one, Scott and Stan started off the day for us, which was a lot of fun. Scott once said that George George can get into the mess, the market's mess, and he knows to get out, right? And most people don't know how to get out of that mess. Stan never even gets in the mess in the first place. Um, I dare say, even on this podcast, and I don't know, out in the public sphere, Stan is a better investor than George. He has a he just has a skill that I think is unique and second to none. But that's like comparing, as I say that he's better than George, and I very much think he is a much better investor than George. Certainly at size, he's shown an ability that few have shown. Um, um, I don't know if I knew sports, I'd compare two, and you realize like the
LeBron
gradations
James
are
and
so.
Michael Jordan.
There you go, LeBron James and Michael Jordan.
Each person will decide whether George is LeBron James or
Yeah,
Michael Jordan, or whether Stan is LeBron
thank you.
James or
I
Michael
like
Jordan.
that.
Yeah.
I like that. But yeah, Stan is a very unique talent.
I sense also their politics are pretty different.
They are quite different. They're quite different. But despite the difference in their politics, one thing that I always think about, especially in today's fractured times, is the way that they're both focused on helping people. George comes from the far left. He's not by any stretch far right. I think classifies himself as independent. Um, but he just stepped down as chairman of Blue Meridian, which is one of the most amazing organizations in helping underprivileged people in America that exists today. I mean, it's an absolute powerhouse. Amazon, you look at the list of multi-centibillionaires, whatever the term is these days, that are involved in it is incredible. That was all Stan's doing, pulling them all together.
Amazing. And how would you describe your investing style, having been both at Soros and with Stan?
Uh, my investing style is a bit different. I'm not a really great investor, and I say that with complete sincerity. It's true. What I'm very good at is figuring out a trend or an area to be in and finding the right people to do that. That's what I'm good at. I'm not good at like underwriting a specific security. I am good at underwriting a person, and I'm good at underwriting a theme or a trend and putting that person together, the theme or the trend.
Okay, so one trend which we'll come back to is Israel. Why Dubai, not Tel Aviv? What's another trend?
Right now,
Yeah.
there are very few trends that are super interesting to me right now. Just because of there are a lot of scary and concerning ones.
That's good also. Keep going. What's scary and
There are
concerning?
also some hopefully pretty optimistic ones, which we can get to. But there there's not right now. What interests me from an investing standpoint is the next wave because from our youth doing this, I started a firm called Hambrecht and Quist. Um, you were at Martila and Kiley, right? Was it?
Well, that was a consulting firm, but when
I'm
you were at
just trying to
Hamilton
think of your
Quiz, I went
first
to
job
Montgomery.
after
Yeah,
Montgomery Securities.
right
That was
afterwards.
after.
Yeah.
Yeah. I'm trying to get back to our old CVs. All these tech waves always have a second wave that rises from the ashes of the first wave, and the second wave is always, I mean, historically has always been better than the first. Maybe this time will be different, but there's certain waves right now that are interesting to me because as they smash upon the rocks, the second wave will be pretty interesting. Those are in areas like quantum computing and certain areas of physical substrates for semiconductors, et cetera, that are needed for this next wave of technologies, both software and hardware. But those are the areas that are of great interest to me right now.
You were also a comms and semis analyst way back in Hamilton
I
Quiz, right?
was, yeah,
Why is that important to have been a comms and semis analyst?
because the physical layer is something that's been is so important for everything that occurs, and B has been so underinvested in right now. And I think
Explain.
that is the great opportunity set. The investing mindset from here, it's like we're sitting here, we're Statler and Waldorf, as I want to watch The Muppet Show, like sitting here and like making fun of everybody and everything. They're my two favorite characters in The Muppet Show. But investment cycles have shortened so dramatically since we started, right? The average life of a venture fund and the average life of an investment was much longer. People had a lot more patience, especially in those days. When I started out, I think my great claim to fame was I wrote the first Wall Street research report on cable modems. Um, but there were a lot of things happening at the time that took a long time to bake. And you fast forward to today, after that first wave of the internet happened, everything's whether it's software eats the world or ate the world or whatever the heck the quote was from Mark Andreessen. But the problem is everyone's so focused on the software layer that everything has gotten to a much shorter time frame People expect something. The capital investment required to bring a company to profitability is much shorter, is much lower. B, the time expected before that happens is much shorter. So there's less patience among investors and among entrepreneurs, certainly among investors, which I think drives the limit of entrepreneurial patience. So there's a massive underinvestment in the technological underpinnings of everything that we do. And you've seen a very negative consequence of that happening because countries where I'm a capitalist at heart, but countries where there's top-down control have done a much better job of investing for the long term in these areas than the U.S. has. And not the areas that make them more competitive on the global landscape in terms of economic growth, and by this, obviously, I mean China versus the US and overall economic growth, but the physical underpinnings of what we need day to day in technology land, which is why we've been so worried about fabs and all kinds of other physical infrastructure, and why we're so worried about what Huawei's doing versus what's happening with companies in the West. But I think we have a lack of patience, and the lack of patience has led to a certain degree of malinvestment.
But even like today, if you look at like Jensen at NVIDIA, right? He's sped up the clock on semiconductor releases to a year.
Yeah,
I mean, it's insane. And, and that's a moat
that's
on
a
his
moat.
business. But, these businesses, even the hardware businesses are getting faster
Yeah.
today.
But the ability to create the next generation of hardware to compete with what he's doing still takes a long time.
Right.
And the problem is very few are investing in that long duration cycle to compete with him at the next stage. Um, So as great as he's done, how many, you look at each decade, which companies are top 10 market cap versus the prior decade, maybe NVIDIA will still be there. It's usually 80 or 90% fallout. So I hope he does. It's great for the US, it's great for Israel, it's great for the West. But somebody's in a little corner somewhere and has patience, hopefully, and is building something to be the dominant player in the next decade. But the problem is few and fewer. I think. I mean, you're more of an expert in this than I am, but there's definitely that lack of patience in terms of long term R&D.
I think there's also a lot of supply chain lock-in. If you look at TSMC, the U.S. thought that they'd build it in Arizona. Turns out it's much harder than anyone thinks. One, the Taiwanese don't want to share their expertise that
Right.
much. And then the other part of it is there's actually a supply chain around it in Taiwan that helps you iterate there a lot faster than you can in the U.S. This is hard to do, actually.
Which is why I'm excited about some of the things that you've been looking at, like using synthetic biology to take control of some of the processes for next generation lithography. I mean, that's exactly what's needed when you think far out and say, okay, here's how the supply chain works today, and here's what's going on. And I, Michael, have this really interesting guy who's worth looking up for those who do use the internet and social media, because I was just made fun of because I don't. Uh, but who's just an incredible entrepreneur is thinking about the way to do this with proteins, right?
Correct.
To just take over the current processes for lithography. That would be an incredible, if it works, and I hope it works. But think what will happen to all of these current generation companies, ASML, et cetera, if he succeeds. And somebody will succeed, and hopefully it'll be him. But that's exactly what I'm talking about. People like him are rare, and the patience to invest in a person like him is rare. Kudos to Allah for doing that, but that's very unusual.
Thank you. What would it take to get long-term capital to think about investing in this, in kind of creating these next-gen infrastructure? Right. Your career started, and people don't know, but the Hammerton and Quiz times in the mid to late 90s was all about, then you went to Oppenheimer, if I remember
Yep.
correctly. All right. And so,
Which is how I got into Israel, because Oppenheimer was all focused here. I just saw Aaron Stone in New York
yeah.
2 weeks ago. It turns out our daughters are gonna go to college at the same place in 2 years, which is fun.
To
But
close the loop, Aaron Stone and I grew up together on the west side of Manhattan, so I know him forever, and Sender knows him also. Even though we're at rival high schools, Sender knows him also from the
exactly,
beginning of his
Ramaz,
career.
yeah.
And because the
Mike,
cousin he mentioned earlier also grew up with me together, this is like a small
yeah.
group of people. And then Aaron had a great career at Apollo.
And, a great Kern, his father was, like, the lawyer who opened up Israel, at Weill Gotshal, and I remember my first business trip to Israel was right when I moved to Oppenheimer, and I come to Israel, and Mr. Stone's on my flight, so, A, I'm not in the back in tower area, seat 47C. I'm like, "This is what the front of the plane looks like." B, I'm with Mr. Stone, so it's very exciting.
If we're having fun stories, so the first IPO I did, who was the attorney? Mr. Stone, who I grew up with, but everyone's calling each other by their first names. It's a little awkward for me to call him David. But nonetheless, we go around this U-shaped table at the org meeting, which used to be in person. I think it's all
Yeah,
virtual
mine
now.
was a rad group org meeting. That's why I came to Ishel.
Okay, mine I believe was the Radcom IPO, and uh, and I'm the
Mine
last
was
guy
REIT.
at the edge of the U on the table because I'm operating the presentation on PowerPoint, and I introduced myself as Michael Eisenberg and Mr. Stone, or David Stone says, and I was at his bris. One of those moments where if I turned red, generally I probably would have been then. But back to semiconductors in the late '90s. So the mid to late '90s. So this was a time where you had um, first HDSL,
Mhm.
is cable modem stuff, and then telecom, ADSL. These were companies that don't exist anymore.
Yeah.
Paragain, Eastside Telecom here, and others.
Orkut,
Orchid.
Terayon,
Yeah, a lot of Israeli companies in that too.
Com21, Libit for cable modems, which Texas Instrument bought. I mean, the underpinnings of so much of what we have today and what we take for granted today, uh, for telecom and for broader communications come from Israel. It's absolutely amazing.
And that was like a golden era where there actually were these longer lead
Yep.
time hardware plays. And by the way, even today, I don't think NVIDIA becomes what it becomes if it's not for Mellanox.
No,
And
totally
Eyal
agree.
Wallman, also a company that kinda pitter-pattered along for a long time. It got struggled to get going, and then it hit a moment, almost I think it was probably 7 or 8 years as a public company,
Yeah, when people realize this is the golden key needed to unlock the speed
right?
that's
InfiniBand,
required.
which was the
Yeah.
Mellanox standard, everyone kinda laughed at early on. What was the standard? What does it take to get investors to go back to that kinda underpinnings? And by the way, it's material science.
Material
I
scientists.
remember there were companies here working on chips with gallium arsenide back in the '90s when I
Yeah.
started. It's networking, data. I mean, you see how it pays off. I mean, NVIDIA is a 30-year project, right? Mellanox is a 25-year project.
Yeah.
But that's how you gain dominance over time and build an industry. What does it take to get people to come back
Yeah, it's
into
like
that?
the old wave division multiplexing companies, back to the days of Chromatis and a number of other companies in that sector. But the ability to more finely parse wavelengths that you're sending over a fiber optic cable and multiplex and demultiplex those wavelengths, and then translate them from optical to electric are just are technologies that A started in the 90s, B started with many Israeli companies. It takes a patience and understanding that, it's kind of your comment about Mellanox. It's an understanding that certain basic race research building blocks have to be built, and you don't know when they'll become applied. And your Mellanox comment reminds me of the Hemingway quote, which I'm sure I'm gonna phrase wrongly. But how did I go bankrupt slowly then fast? Certain things sit there and they're not necessary. You don't realize how critical they'll be as a building block, but it's important to invest in them. You know that they have a great value. You don't know exactly how that will apply, and you don't know when that will apply. But there's something as a national asset, is something that a country that has an economic policy or a technology policy, those being the same thing, that's focused on the long term, has to invest in, because you don't know when that bankruptcy that's going slowly will go fast. But in the opposite way, that building block that exists will be so critical, a component of what's needed for the next generation of growth.
One of the things I was thinking about as you were talking about all those companies that have kind of come and gone, but their products and infrastructure persist is maybe actually what's needed is a bubble, right? Many of those companies went public in the internet, or what's actually the telecom bubble of the late '90s. Pets.com became the poster child, but there was, all these companies you mentioned, plus a host of others that got bought by Cisco for gobs of
Yeah.
money. Um, but all that laid the infrastructure that we're benefiting from today.
A bubble can actually be a great thing if controlled properly. If control what I mean by that, and I think there's a George Soros quote of, "There's always a bubble forming somewhere," in terms of investments. But obviously, a bubble is bad for an economy when the bubble blows up and what it does. But you need to create enough of a critical mass in a given industry or sector, which includes failed companies where scientists or entrepreneurs or engineers go off and start new companies. So what could be irrational for the individual is very rational for the whole, for policy of a country or for a large organization that's testing different things and seeing what things do or don't work. But you go to your point, right? The Telecom Act finally passes 96 after a few years of failed attempts.
Tell everyone what the
The
Telecom Act is.
Telecom Act is what deregulated the telecom networks in the United States. And we were, 2 years or so out of school, and, better be lucky than smart. We caught the wave because Michael and I had started working and we were looking at this area and, you know, kind of figuring stuff out. And then boom, like the starting gun gets triggered, and just the amount of investment pouring into the sector just went up exponentially. And on the one hand, you had a bubble burst, and the bubble bursting in 2000 led to a 3-year downturn in the S&P. I think one of only 3 times in history that's happened. But out of that came what we all look at today in the internet, and these companies that were formed in that first telecom bubble. All the engineers from them, either the companies in and of themselves grew, but oftentimes the engineers went off and started new companies. So I said it might have been bad individually for the company or perhaps for the venture fund that created that company, but the venture funds that actually understood what they're doing and stayed around ended up being the great venture funds, and the investors that stayed around ended up being the great investors, and et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. But that created enough of a critical mass of people and knowledge from the failed and the successful companies that a lot of really interesting stuff happened. It's funny. You had Adam on a few weeks ago,
Yeah,
right?
Adam
So,
Fisher. Yeah.
so who is indeed incredible. There are 3 great investors in Israel, in my mind: Michael, Adam. I know who the third one is. Michael knows who I'm thinking about. I'm not going to say who it is just so that anyone else doesn't think I'm thinking about them. But but I'm hopefully going to see him this week for a little Hanukkah party. But Adam had said to me, in terms of an initiative I'm working on with Adam and Michael, and another friend of ours, Scott Tobin, that there you have it, Adam, that perhaps we should think broader and do more in these sectors, because you need that critical mass that's out there. If you don't have the critical mass of people out there, even if some of the companies will fail, we're not going to create the critical mass again needed to create the next wave of growth.
Short-term bubbles can be painful. Long-term, though, they lay infrastructure. And I think the same is true probably
Absolutely.
about AI and compute right now.
100%, I agree with that.
This is likely a bubble of sorts,
Yep.
although, NVIDIA is not trading at the crazy multiple that Cisco was back in
Right.
2000. I think Cisco is trading at a, you know, price earnings multiple like
Oh
120
yeah, it's
back in
amazing. And
2000.
Nvidia also, right? I mean,
NVIDIA's like at 30,
they
though.
report earnings, and, like, their multiple contracts because they've have such explosive earnings growth. It's been amazing to watch. And I don't think there are any companies. I mean, Cisco at the height was at. I remember there were price targets. There was an analyst in 2000 who had a price target in Cisco, which was the equivalent of 9% of nominal United States GDP, which seemed a little bit out of whack. It never got there, and I don't think anyone has quite that euphoric or bubbly
I remember when Henry
perspective.
Blodgett said that Amazon was going to be $1,000 a share, and he was laughed at and basically
Yeah,
fired because of that.
yeah,
He was right.
he was right.
Unlike in the case of the Cisco analyst, that there'd be 9% of GDP,
Right.
Blodgett was right, but the bubble burst on him, and he was tarred and feathered, but
Yeah,
he was
but he was absolutely
100%
right.
right.
Yeah.
I think, by the way, one of the differences is that uh, consumer-facing stuff can actually scale pretty infinitely, whereas infrastructure at some point runs up against price erosion in a meaningful way, and changing technologies and need for speed in that case, and
Yeah.
other things. Yeah.
Yeah, Cisco had a lot of constraints that Amazon didn't have, for sure.
Yeah. So so we talked about this basic technology and technology policy. Can you tell everyone about Nevo Labs, what you're working on?
You're working on,
We're all trying to make it work.
we're working on it together. Because of our experience in the 90s, we wanted to kind of I wouldn't say reset the clock, but kind of reset the stage and say, okay, what is it that is needed to help make Israel great in the next generation of technologies? How do we create a environment in Israel that is like a Bell Labs, where we can get these scientists in Israel with the right tools, the right systems, the right resources, that they can sit and have the luxury of time and colleagues in different fields to develop that which is needed for Israel's next generation of growth.
Not just Israel's next generation, but the regions
The
and
region, the world, that I think, and I don't live here, so maybe I'm gonna mischaracterize something, but I think in my view, looking from the outside, Israel is very good at what's needed for the next 1 or 2 years because of the military, right? Very good at near-term cyber stuff. Israel's very good at 30-year out research, winning a Nobel Prize. Israel has not been great about what's needed 5 to 15 years out, that middle stage. So we all go on about how many Nobel Prizes and Fields medals and this and that Israelis have won, which is incredibly important. And heck, I could never even win a Fulbright. That's why I was happy I was named chair by Tom because now I can like tell my mom like I'm associated with Fulbright. But but
And your mom was
those
an academic, right?
my
Or
dad was a
your dad was an
professor.
academic,
Yeah,
yeah,
yeah.
yeah.
So he would have been very very
He
happy
would
to
have been
see my
proud.
association.
Yeah.
But but Israel has not been good at that middle stage. Again, to quote Adam Fisher, who's working on this with us, Israel's very good at the D, but not that great at the R. I mean, if you look at the R numbers, the research numbers out of Israel, a lot of the research funding here, the foreign share of funding for research in Israel is frighteningly high. It's I think 7 or 8 times that of other OECD countries, which is very scary, especially times like this. B, there's just you just don't have these big commercial labs or other sorts of labs with technology transfer that you have in the United States. There was actually an article in Harvard Magazine. Harvard used to be a good word until a few months ago. But there was an article last week in Harvard Magazine. uh, I think it's the only article I've ever read in Harvard Magazine, but a few people sent it to me. It came out, yeah, last Monday or Tuesday about why commercial labs are taking people from academic labs. And it was a much more articulate version of what I'm trying to say, and I urge everyone to read it who finds this topic interesting. But it walked through why people are leaving Harvard and MIT and, you pick your other school that we like these days or don't like anymore, but why they're going to commercial labs. And it quoted, it focused on 4 scientists that left Harvard and went to these different labs and why they're so much better. A, less bureaucracy. B, um, the ability to be more flexible in how they research things. The incentives are set up better. I mean, just goes through like I said, it's the best articulation I've seen of why this trend is happening, why this trend is going to continue. Interesting that Harvard Magazine itself had this, but it walks through why this should happen, and not in Israel, but why we have to make this happen in Israel. And the good news is this model exists, right? In the United States, there are multiple of these labs that have been tremendously successful. This article actually focuses on a really cool, innovative new one called Arena Labs in Boston. And one of the 4 scientists interviewed is one of the founders of that, with an incredible family named Pagliuca that doesn't come up in the piece, but they're the ones who were behind the scenes helping put it all together.
He was the CEO of Bain Capital,
Yeah, yeah,
and I
great,
think the
great.
CEO of the Celtics, right? Or
One of
the
the
Red
owners of the
Sox? One of
Celtics.
the owners of
Yeah.
the Celtics, yeah.
But they've done something amazing with this. But Arena's a great model for this. But Israel's never had this, and the idea is to bring this. There's nothing new under the sun here. There's nothing we're inventing here. We're just saying here are the best practices that have worked in the United States very successfully, either as part of a commercial labs attached to a large corporation, AT&T, or a lab that is in private hands that is addressing the shortcomings of the academy and complementing them, to be sure. It's not to replace them, to help create a safe space, to use the term du
An
jour.
unsafe space, actually, right? Because
Yes,
you
an
can
unsafe
experiment and blow a
space.
lot of things up, or
Yeah, and develop really great things that are needed for the future. So how do we take that model, move it to Israel, and use that model to say, here are scientists that are focused in the lower layers of the OSI stack, maybe some of the higher layers too, but the lower layers that are underinvested in, and make sure that we're thinking about those layers for the long-term future of the country and the world.
so one of the challenges with Bell Labs over time, I think it caused it to lose a lot of its luster, was actually economics, right? They don't seem to have done a great job of creating a business model that works. So how much money is it gonna take to set up Nevo Labs to start?
How much does it take?
Yeah, capital.
It depends how ambitious we want to be in terms of
Throw out the number.
the best thing to do is start it with around $800 million, so we can start with 4 sectors that are
Which of the 4 sectors gonna
critical
be?
critical sectors for us. Uh,
Unless you
the
don't wanna say.
the only reason I hesitate is because some of the sectors we're still debating sectors 3 and 4, but we know we're going to do synthetic biology, We know that we're going to do some stuff in the quantum space. And we know we're going to do some stuff in AI. AI is obviously an overused term. It reminds me of Stake.com. Remember the company in Herzliya Pituach, Stake.com, which was a great sign of the bubble then. But in terms of some next generation underlying technologies needed for AI, but we're still trying to figure out what the fourth one will be. But it takes a great deal of money to do it right and have the patience. It's the duration of capital. And that's a critical thing to address here also. And I'm going to go on a tangent to come back to why it's critical to how we set up Nevo. But um, hedge funds, I'm going to make fun of hedge funds a little bit, but a lot of hedge funds, a lot of long short funds are not all that great at creating strong returns, but they solve for other issues. They solve for the expectations of their investors. They solve for vol characteristics that investors want. They solve for leverage characteristics that their investors want. But oftentimes there was a great Steve Ballmer interview recently where he talked about how he's just in ETFs and
Microsoft
Microsoft stock. You saw that,
and the
right?
Clippers.
And the Clippers, yeah, which was a not as good as an investment as the Microsoft stock, but still a lot of fun. But you have to solve for the expectations of your investors and the duration that you have. But just being simply long the markets, unless your name is Stan Druckenmiller, who can consistently outperform the markets, the few that are touched by God, as I sacrilegiously like to call them, then it's better to just be passive and then do things in the private sector, things like Aleph does, where it's talent and access rather than the chance of the public markets. But uh, people invest based on the expectations of their investors. Investors want to make sure you have an up month every month or an up quarter because you're reporting. Then you have to invest that way. If you're investing for yourself and you're not looking for 10 years, you can just be long ETFs and you'll do great. So it depends. It depends what the expectations are, but it's the same thing with basic research. You have to create a pool of capital that's longer duration, like funds used to be, where the investors have expectation that this will take a longer term to get to fruition. You'll end up in a great return place because investors that did this in the old days ended up in a very good place. But you have to have a lot of patience with that capital. And let me go back to AT&T and Bell Labs and what happened there. Bell Labs was a very interesting story because Bell Labs was fortunate in that it was attached to a very large monopoly. So and I might not have the full history, but oftentimes the DOJ, maybe not oftentimes, the DOJ would come and want to break up AT&T because it was a monopoly. And I think part of what Bell Labs, they're offering to the regulatory gods was this is pre-Lena Khan crazy. They were still crazy, not as crazy as she is or was. I guess she's gone now, thankfully. But
I hope she's going to be gone. She's a real threat to
disaster.
capitalism.
Yeah. So yeah.
Yeah, so part of the offering to the gods, to the
It's
regulatory gods,
part of the
was
budget was we're gonna give the IP away for free, right? That'll be the public service. We're not gonna license the IP that comes out of Bell Labs. So the Bell Labs business model in terms of what the IP did for the world was not, okay, we licensed it out. Because it was better to have these highly tariffed phone calls on the other side that were minting money. You'd call New York City, New Jersey, and it was a long distance call, right? You had these highly tariffed phone calls that were minting money. So better to give away that IP for free that was being generated by the profits from AT&T that were being pushed into Bell Labs. Commercial labs these days don't have that monopoly attached to them. Some have excess profits from companies attached to them. Think of Google, although those also get tightened up when times are tough. The commercial labs that have done best in times like these are the independent commercial labs that have a investing mindset. They're not philanthropy, which is critically important. There has to be accountability and discipline. You want to have long-term capital and you want to have the freedom to do what you want. And you want to make sure it's multidisciplinary, but at the same time you want to make sure it's not philanthropic. There has to be a goal. But capital that's set up properly that way in these commercial apps has done extraordinarily well.
so.
It's
What's the
made a lot of
return you
money,
think an
had a
investor
great
is going to get?
impact.
What's the IRR?
Oh God,
All right, we
I
only,
have regulators like that. Uh, the IRRs of these have been very good. If you look at the commercial labs that have come into being in the United States, they've been highly profitable. They've had pretty pretty strong returns that that definitely justify the duration of the capital. And like when I invest, I always think for every year of lockup, there should be 100 basis points of excess return over the given benchmark. And the best commercial labs in the United States have certainly met or exceeded that hurdle. I think for good reason, because that basic stuff becomes applied really fast overnight and has a lot of value. And what I'm saying also reminds me of another great quote about Bell Labs, that it was a ivory tower. In other words, people could do whatever they wanted with a factory downstairs, right? So you want to create that ivory tower so scientists can do what they want and explore, but they have to know there's a factory downstairs and it has to have output so that it can justify the ivory tower up top. And universities usually are one of the two things, and other institutions are the other of the two things. The harmony is bringing those together where there's a capitalist accountability, but also with the freedom, read duration of capital and enough capital, that very good scientists who have an applied mindset are working towards some sort of a goal.
So if there's a scientist sitting right now, Israeli, Jewish or otherwise,
Mhm.
he's sitting right now at MIT, at Harvard, at the University of Toronto, in, I don't know, Washington University, in Stanford, in Berkeley, in École de Polytechnique in France, make the pitch why they're coming to Nevo Labs.
The pitch is simple. The issue of not first of all, focus on the issue of why they wouldn't come back, and we spend a lot of time meeting with different scientists, but also talking to a lot of people at Bell Labs and at these commercial labs that exist today. And by the way, most fun has been speaking to people who used to work at Bell Labs. Just fun stories, but also just the magic that happened there. But the problem right now is if you finish you're going to go to the United States for your postdoc 9 out of 10 times, I think, because that's where the opportunity is, and that's where a great scientist is that can mentor you, et cetera, et cetera. You finish your postdoc, you live in Boston, there's not much opportunity to come back to Israel and make what you can make in the United States and have the freedom that you make in the United States, because it's a smaller country. It doesn't have as much infrastructure for this. But also in the fields that you're in, there's none of that go back to that mid-duration research for 5 to 15 years if that's what you're interested in. So you're making X as a postdoc in Boston, and then you're offered X plus Y to go to some commercial lab or some corporate in Boston. Again, read the Harvard Magazine article of last week. It does a good job of talking about some of this. And in Israel, that opportunity simply doesn't exist today. So even if you want to come back, it's hard to come back. You're in Boston. You're going to move to Tel Aviv, which has the same cost of living or higher, probably higher. And you don't have that career opportunity that you have in Boston. So you're going to end up staying. And that's a problem, because once you stay, you put down roots and you stay for longer, and hopefully you come back at some point. But it it the opportunity set doesn't exist here to bring them back, and that's exactly what we're
Why
trying to
will it be
address.
better than being there, though?
Why will it be better? I wouldn't say that it will be better from a scientific standpoint right away, but it can definitely be the same. And if it can be the same and they can live where they want to live and not live where they're going to live because that's where the opportunity is, that I think is equal. Longer term, I think it will be better because you can create these, to use a corny term, whatever, these clusters, these centers of excellence in Israel where they can really be leading the charge in certain areas that, as Israel has done today in different areas, will be at the forefront of these
So
technology
if I'm an
developments.
American scientist, Jewish or otherwise, at Berkeley, what's the pitch?
The pitch is, once we have this lab center set up here, and you've seen what we've done, we, Israel, I shouldn't say we, I'm not Israeli, I'm an American with Canadian citizenship too, uh, that you could be at the forefront of starting the next big wave in Israel, like Israel did in cyber and did in these areas in the 90s that we were part of. And Israel's in danger of not being at the head of these areas, but Israel could easily be a leader in these areas today. I'm not very good at elevator pitches. Can you tell? We'll leave that to Michael.
By the way, you may need to take out Israeli citizenship, because if Trump has his way, your Canadian citizenship will just be American citizenship. And then,
I mean, I have always looked as Canada's the 51st state and Israel's the 52nd. Sorry, guys, but
so, Rakevet Rusek Aminoach on this front said I should ask you,
she's
yeah,
great.
yeah, she's great. We agree. She's on the board of Fulbright with you, I think, right?
Yes.
And so she said, you made a non-trivial personal decision to start Nevo and some of the other stuff you're working on and leave the Schusterman family office to go do this. Like, why'd you do that?
Why did I do it? I just, one of your colleagues here talked about how after 2 months working in America after October 7th, felt a need to quit and come here. I wanted to do something, maybe it's because 'cause I'm 52, he's much younger than I am, but, I wanted to do something a little bit focused and actually do something, impactful. I'm not an impact investor, I don't think I'll ever be an impact investor.
God forbid, that's a terrible thing
I
about
am a
investment.
capitalist through and through, uh, but I also there's a funny plaque on my desk at home that I think my mother-in-law made because my kids call me worker man. Nobody can tell what I do. I move money around. I make money. There's nothing substantial that
My
comes.
mother-in-law also doesn't know what I
Yeah,
do, I
like
think. I don't know.
I don't know. It's weird. One day we'll figure out.
Two guys who went to MTA, that's why they can't figure
It's
it out.
exactly when you get three Fs in finals, you know. Um, I wanted to do something here that actually had a real impact, and there's a gaping hole, and and sitting with Scott and Michael and Adam and brainstorming about what needs to be done. Somebody threw out the phrase a private sovereign wealth fund, which is an oxymoron, but this country needs a private sovereign wealth fund. Somebody threw out the phrase, and somebody being one of those three people could have been Michael sitting right here, but private sector subsidy to the private sector. There are certain things that need to happen here with no comments about government here or in the United States. I think there's the Ronald Reagan quote. What are the nine scariest words in the English language? And I'll probably use more than nine words. I'm from the government and I'm here to help or
Right.
something like that. Like it's important for the private sector to step in and make a difference and fill those holes that are desperately need to be filled. And the optimistic side says, unfortunately, war has obviously uh, catastrophic, unfortunate consequences, but wars also lead to great economic booms that can be great for the country and make sure the country is well positioned for that economic boom in the right sectors that make sure it is what it is today in the future, compounded by the fact that it has more enemies in the world now, unfortunately, so we need to offset that. But this all came together in my head and said, okay, here's, I'm hopefully young enough that there's a great investing chapter ahead. I have great friends in Israel, like these three guys. Let's build something great here where we can have that impact. And I'm the one sitting in America, so I'm like I'm gonna quit my job to do it. They're already doing something great because they're sitting here and investing here, but I want it to just be focused on this country. So
So on that topic, I asked Stan Druckenmiller what I should ask you. You know what he said?
what do you say?
Please explain why you are uniquely positioned to thrive doing like venture capital or all this tech stuff in Israel.
Goodwill. I think I have hopefully a lot of relationships that where I can tie things together in the US and in Israel, because of friends I made some unfriends also, but friends that I made in the US technology and investing industry, and friends I made in the Israeli technology investing industry, and friends I've made in the Gulf investing in technology industries that hopefully we can pull together to create something unique.
So I'm glad you mentioned the Gulf because that was going to be my next point. You have a lot of relationships in the GCC countries writ large. Um, people you've worked
By the way,
with.
for my 30th birthday, Stan gave me two presents. Which was one was like very heartfelt, which was a Tanakh from Cologne, Germany from 1709, which was
Wow.
a beautiful, beautiful, thoughtful present. And the second was a belt from a golf club that doesn't have many of us as members, and that was funny. So it was the fact that you saw his sense of the same box, his great sense of humor, and also a very,
A
very
Hebrew
thoughtful gift
Bible
of
and
great
a belt of
importance.
something you can't open or
Correct.
go to.
Yeah.
All right, perfect. The Saudis are about to normalize this. So I don't think that's a great secret. Um,
Hopefully.
well, maybe they were before October 7th, and now hopefully
Right.
they'll come back. Trump's in office. Jared Kushner is back.
Yeah. And I've been to
Unofficially.
Saudi Arabia a few times. It is, it's incredible. It's incredible to see. It's incredible to meet the entrepreneurs there. I spoke at convening a friend there who's a venture capitalist, who's a phenomenal venture capitalist, invited me to speak at a convening he had. I wore a jacket. I spoke publicly to a room,
For
but
those who
it
don't
was
know you, both of those
both
things
are,
are unusual. The fact that Sender is sitting in this seat now it is in itself remarkable. It's his first podcast. Round of applause.
yeah, my, thank you.
Yeah.
It's like my wife said, I come to the Middle East and that's where I speak in front of a room since I never do it in America. But what's happening technology-wise in Riyadh is incredible. I mean, you just see the green shoots, they said, when the great financial crisis ended, but you was ending. You see these green shoots of a great technology wave. The demographics are strong. The deregulatory push is strong. The spirit of investment and entrepreneurship is strong. So a lot of great things happening there,
And
which
I
are
just came
super
back from
interesting.
Abu Dhabi, where there's a sign that says capital of capital, but at the same time, it's not just about money or the sovereign wealth funds there. There is an incredible, incredible focus on the AI, and you see it from the top down, apropos some of the comments you made about China earlier. But it's top down with some real entrepreneurship underneath and a strategic understanding of their unique place in the world as it relates to AI and real strategy. You know, to your point about Israel earlier, what's the 2 to 15 year strategy? Where, if you think about Nevo Labs and when you said before also, why can't Tel Aviv be the next Dubai? How does the region fit into your plans for what you're planning, both at Nevo Labs and what you're calling KH2 Capital?
The region fits in because there's a lot of interest, I think, and I think you've seen the same thing in regional collaboration because it's good for the region, it's good for the world, it's good for the countries, it's good for the region, it's good for the world. The sectors that are of great import to Israel are also of great import to these other countries in the region. They're equally, if not more, I wouldn't say more importantly, to incredibly important to the United States of America. That its allies, are strong in these areas. Uh, but but there's a great interest in collaborating in these sectors. I think, from what I've seen and heard. Uh, and I think the sectors that we're focused on are sectors where you're going to see a lot of great intellectual capital. You are seeing great intellectual capital in countries in the region, but also interest from a policy, either top down in these countries or bottoms up among the people, to make sure they're focused on the next waves of these technologies, both for independence, security independence, trade, peace. I mean, a whole bunch of good
What's the
reasons.
most interesting thing you've heard as you talk about Nevo or KH2 in the Gulf countries that would surprise people listening?
The deep interest in scientific exchange and in and understanding technology together and working on technology together.
For
I
what
th-
for
I
what end?
think
Good.
I
Yeah.
think there's always misconceptions out there. I'm full of misconceptions in my head, but there's the entrepreneurial and the engineering and scientific classes, let's call them, have a great interest from what I've seen in both sides, in both parts of this region, collaborating on these next generation technologies, because it's beneficial to all the countries in the region.
You said that why not Tel Aviv? Why should it be Dubai? What did you specifically refer to there?
Oh, that I was referring to something else that we've been talking about for a while, which is it's nuts that Tel Aviv has such a underdeveloped alternative asset management sector. Israel has done a great job in the venture industry, phenomenal job. But given the number of our you know tribe members in the hedge fund industry, in my industry in New York and in London, the fact that this industry barely exists in Tel Aviv is kind of nuts.
What do you think it is?
Government. Full stop. End of story. The country just hasn't made it a priority. They just haven't made it a focus, which is perplexing. I'm not sure why that is. It doesn't require much in the way of tax changes. It requires certain policy frameworks be put in place to encourage uh, immigration of people that are in the sector. But a lot of people, somebody said to me, somebody who's not Jewish, who's a very senior executive at one of the banks in New York, said to me that Dubai, with apologies to our friends in Dubai, Dubai is a short-term rental. Tel Aviv is a long-term purchase, meaning somebody would move to Dubai to work at a hedge fund because it's a tax-free zone, it's fun, it's this or that, but then they're going to leave because they have children, their children get older, they want them to go to school, they want them back home. People who are going to move to Tel Aviv to do this would move to Tel Aviv because they want to live here. It's interesting. You think about financial service in Israel or alternative asset management in Israel. Nevo is trying to solve for the problem of scientists not being able to come here or leaving here, not being able to come here if they're American because the opportunity doesn't exist to do what they can do in America, or leaving and not being able to come back because the opportunity exists for them to come back post their postdoc. H2 is dealing with something different. A lot of Americans and British and French would happily move here. It's a build it if they will come. Going back to movies from, we were talking about Dumb and Dumber and Jackass, some of my favorite movies from my youth, but Field of Dreams. This is generally a Field of Dreams scenario. If you build it, they will come. If the financial services sector in Israel was hedge fund friendly, the way the Gulf, the Dubai has done a brilliant job of setting up that infrastructure, there are so many people that would move here, from portfolio managers to analysts to securities lawyers, that the opportunity just doesn't exist. But if the ecosystem, to use a word I try and avoid, existed here, they would happily move here, especially post October 7th. And go back to me quitting what I was doing because I wanted to focus on Israel. I keep saying all things being equal post October 7th, a lot of why things would not have happened in the hedge fund industry beforehand made sense. Now they make more sense to happen in Israel. People want to live here. More people want to move here because of what happened. Um, and then again, you look at what's happening in Dubai. It's not hard to do.
Be
It's
specific. Like,
just
what does the government need to do here?
the
Like, I
government.
tried with crypto here, and we're making some progress, but it's like a nightmare, to be honest. The government can't get their act together. In the meantime, all these Israeli crypto entrepreneurs are going to Dubai.
Right.
And so what does the government need to do here and I'm going to be ambitious. Right now, tech is like 50% of exports and 35% of tax revenues, and it
Yeah.
employs 12% of the population. Israel needs a second industry. What would it take to make uh, uh, alternative assets, financial services, fund management, etc., the second large industry of Israel, especially with all this talent?
So first, your point is entirely valid. Israel needs a second large industry, and the great thing about this is you can create a large industry, a high income industry that percolates and creates jobs, has a great multiplier effect to the economy by simply moving talent over that wants to be in this country, which is great. The other thing that's very interesting about this industry, which we'll start getting to your answer, is it's all accretive to the tax base. It doesn't exist here. So bringing people in from all of these countries that are high earners, it's all accretive dollars. It's not a it's not a tax cut for somebody that's existing. I'm not even talking about taxes. You have incremental taxpayers that are coming to the country. Um, Israel needs a clear framework. I'm not a regulatory expert, nor do I have the sheets in front of me, but having a clear framework that meets the standards, because it's important. I keep saying all things being equal pre and post October 7th. It's important that the industry here meets all the standards of excellence, of compliance, of talent that exists in the United States. So the talent, that's easy. The talent will move here. That's a build it and they will come. The rest is making sure that the regulators and the policymakers understand what the framework is that mirrors what the United States has done. And I think the Gulf has done a very good job of mirroring what's happening in other parts of the world so that that standard of excellence and from a regulatory, et cetera, standpoint exists, and tax and the other policies, but making sure that those frameworks exist so that institutional investors from around the world are happy to invest in Israel. I think right now there's 22 billion or so of hedge fund assets in Israel. And I think the average hedge fund's around $73 million, which, by the way, in and of itself, is an interesting number because typically in the US, a hedge fund doesn't really start to grow till they hit 100, right? And others can come in. So the average hedge fund doesn't even hit that threshold. And I think 80% or so of the capital in Israeli hedge funds is from Israeli domestic institutions. I think 70% of which, I might be mixing those two numbers, the 70 and 80, from private domestic individuals. So you don't have foreign capital here in this industry. So you don't have incremental dollars creating more of a tax base, right? And this isn't to invest in Israeli securities. This is to invest globally, but in funds that are domiciled in Israel. But all they need to do, but it's really not that much, is create a very clear framework from a regulatory standpoint and from a tax standpoint so that a manager knows in coming here who they can hire, how it's going to work, how they can bring in a foreign investor that won't get trapped by some Byzantine policy, so that they feel comfortable investing in an Israeli domiciled hedge fund, and then the rest will take care of itself. It's really
Do you have a punch list of what needs to change in the regulatory environment?
we do.
Can you send that? We'll put it in the show notes.
I think we could.
Maybe we'll
I'll
translate it to
defer to
Hebrew so that,
yeah, yeah,
the finance minister can read it.
yeah, but they're not a crazy ask, and it's not an frankly, it's not even an ask for us, it's an ask for the industry
Sure.
because the country,
It would be good.
this is something that we think the Israel could really use, as you say, another another industry besides tech,
Do you wonder
another
whether
large
Dubai is
industry.
able to do it because it's not a democracy, but here in a
Yeah,
democracy, it's just hard to
absolutely.
do?
Absolutely.
It just was kind of,
Yeah.
it was the US because the New York Stock Exchange and the NASDAQ, et
Yeah,
cetera,
we
but
all say, democracy is the best system out there. Sometimes it's not. Sometimes, a long-term plan controlled by one person has a greater outcome. It's just reality, objectively speaking. So, absolutely, and they've thankfully very enlightened rulers there who understand things and are great for their people, great for the economy, and they know how to execute. And we here, we being, I guess you guys have a government that's a little complicated.
we never noticed that.
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah. By the way, the other great thing about this industry that I'd also note relative to venture is when venture started, when was Yosma? 96,
91,
97, what, 91, whatever.
91, 92.
So when the Yosma program happened, you think about it, it took 7 or 8 years until you really created tax revenue out of this industry. The great thing about the hedge fund industry is there's tax receipts every year, assuming people make money.
You'd think,
But
given the deficit we've built up, given the war right now, that somebody should be focusing on economic
right?
growth. I have a post coming today on Twitter about how they're going after what are they called, uh, jailed or trapped profits, and what they call personal wallet companies. It's like these tax deferral mechanisms. You'd create a company to do it. So they think they get 10 billion shekels out of taxing, these trapped earnings. And he says, and I read through all the documents of the finance industry and all the documents written by the Bank of Israel. And not one of them does it mention growth, economic growth. Not one of them
Amazing.
doesn't mention growing the total tax base. It's all how do we get access to the current tax base that hasn't been spit out yet.
Wow.
And it's like, come on.
Can you imagine? I mean, I literally say, I keep coming back to you build it, they will come. I mean, you know all the people I'm talking about. People will move here. They're phenomenal money managers. The one thing you talk about tax, and in Dubai, it's tax free for a certain number of years or certain zones. We have a very different perspective. We want people to be taxpayers here. We don't want something to be tax free. The whole idea is for people to come here and contribute to the economy, and it's not just by hiring more people here. It's that the people are moving here and paying taxes.
And so in
Like
order to do that,
that's
you're going to set up a framework that'll help
yeah,
people get feeder money to get started
absolutely.
setting up here. But we got to
But
solve
the
the
but the
regulatory problem.
framework also requires somebody to move here and become a taxpayer here, because if you're not becoming a taxpayer here, we're not helping the country. And helping the country, there is a Tzioni give here, and the Tzioni give is you're moving here and you're not commuting to Spain. Like, we want to be taxpayers here. We want them to be
You're
taxpayers
going to
here. We
be
want
an
to help the
Israeli
country.
domiciled
Yeah.
fund
Fund.
and resident.
Yep.
You will give feeder money
Yep.
to these funds to set up,
Yep.
and that will increase the tax base
We
here.
want
But we
to
have to
increase
solve
the
the
tax
regulatory
base.
issues first
Exactly.
in order to make it a
Yeah.
friendly environment. So I asked Elisa Mall, who runs the Dell family, or part of the Dell family office, I believe.
I think the whole
The
thing.
whole thing, the whole Dell family office,
She's
Elisa
great
runs.
too. You spoke to good people, so
I
that's
did.
good.
And she said, I need to ask you about a sliding doors moment, which is like, had you taken a slightly different path in life, you would have ended up in a very different place.
Well, I wanted to be a history professor when I was in school, and when I first went to Hepburn Quist, I thought, "Okay, I'll work for 2 years." I think I had, like, $1,400 of bar mitzvah money at the time, and I came out of college, and I lived with, Yehuda Stark, Zvi Mendelson, and Benji Hain. Benji,
All guys you went to high school with, by
all
the
went to
way.
high school with, all live in Renata now. Hopefully, I'll see at least one of them this week. I've been very bad at pre-planning, but I just texted one of them about Motzei Shabbat, so let's see what happens. But, uh, Benji lived on a sectional sofa he found on the street, but I, uh, I, uh, I wanted to be a history professor. I wanted to be actually a professor of the history of English common laws. Very broad field. I'm sure there would have been a lot of readers for my books had I ever published any. But I decided to try out Wall Street for a few years, and I got hooked. It was fun, and part of why it was fun is I ended up in the sector that was just growing and fun, optics and semis and all that stuff.
Why is there nothing about you on social media or Google or like anything else?
I pay a service to make sure there's nothing about me on social media or Google or anything. So I was happy to hear that it was hard to find stuff.
Is that right? You
Although
pay someone
now,
for
is
that?
this going to be like, I guess this will be out on something.
Is that right? You pay some
My
people?
kids keep saying it's the internets, like you should understand how that works. A service that makes sure, helps keep your picture off and bios and stuff like that. But I think as a Fulbright, my bio is now on
Wait, so they're going to take they're
on
going
the
to take
World
down our
Wide
podcast
Web.
now? Can you please tell them not to take down our podcast? I mean, please.
They're good services, so that's why I'm not.
Why don't you want to be there?
Why? I don't know. I should get over certain.
You know,
I'm better in the
better in person.
I'm better in person.
People should want to meet you, not just read you.
Yeah, there you go. I don't know.
All right. Tully doesn't want you. Tully's his wife. You don't want to watch social media.
Yeah, I just, when stuff's out on the internet, it's always out on the internet. So
That is true. That is true. Is there like a strongly held opinion that you've had in the past that's changed over the last year?
yeah, my opinions of many people had changed. Just seeing how different people have reacted to what has happened here. People, I know a lot of us in the States have seen this. Some people who've been, um, shall we say, stepping up.
Mm-hmm.
Um, to use another term I hate, allies. Let's go through all the woke terms I hate. But people who have been, very, certain things were troubling me about different worlds that I inhabit in the U.S. And a dear friend of mine in December of last year said, "Sender, let's go out for lunch. I want you to just like spew, what's made you unhappy about hearing about different people's reactions." And I did, and he was a great friend about it. He's been a great friend about it all along. But I've been sorely disappointed how some people have reacted to what happened here, and I've at the same time been incredibly impressed. Impressed is the wrong word because that's but incredibly appreciative of the way others have reacted to events that have affected this country, your country, but also the Jewish people as a whole. So
I find it interesting. By the way, we talked about the Gulf before. I think you've been to Saudi at
a
least
few times,
a few times since
yeah.
October 7th, and it sounds like you're not disappointed with anyone there,
No,
which is I think interesting for people to hear.
no, I'm
I,
not at
I haven't
all.
been disappointed by the Emiratis. And I think the world is realigning in a pretty meaningful way right now.
No, I
It's
can't.
kind of the wokies
Yeah,
over here, and
I came back. It's definitely realigning. And I came back from my trip. I'll be careful about what I say here, but we met with some pretty important people when we were there, um, because of who I was with, not because of me. I was like the ugly duckling in the back of the line. But there was one meeting where somebody referred to with somebody pretty important, where someone referred to the tragedy of October 7th, and I said to the person who brought me to this meeting after the meeting that at Harvard you hear about the jubilation of October 7th, but I come to Saudi Arabia and I hear the comment, the tragedy of October 7th. They understand.
wow.
They are rightly critical of a lot of stuff going on here, but I think we're all rightly critical of a lot of stuff that's going on here. But they also, and on the WhatsApp planning group I had for the trip with my assistant and someone else, I called the Aseret Yimei Tshuva trip because I went during Aseret Yimei Tshuva.
The 10
But
days of repentance, yeah.
the 10 days of repentance. But the trip was a pick me up. I went to Saudi Arabia for a pick me up. Like it felt really good as a proudly Zionist American Jew to be in Saudi Arabia, to see the moral courage of people there, to see the entrepreneurship of people there, to see the respect they have for people here as people. I'm not talking government policy here or anything like that, but just it really felt good. I came home very happy from the trip.
They want me to finish up, but I have to ask you a few more questions. You mentioned Harvard. You've got a kid on an Ivy League campus
I do.
at Brown University.
Yeah.
How do you think about that?
Two things. The president there has been exceptional. That kid is here now, and he's very happy here. He's, I think, visiting a friend right
And a
now
good
who's
kid.
a really great kid that I'm very proud of. That campus has been very good. The president there has been phenomenal. I'd say there are two Ivy League campuses where the presidents have been great, Dartmouth and Brown. The rest, you know,
Some were fired.
yeah, the rest should be fired. But Brown and Dartmouth have been great. But it's been a good experience for him. And it's not as last year he was here. He was at Mali Gilboa. Uh,
Which is
but
like a hilltop near the Jordan Valley.
yeah. Um, when everyone talks about the periphery in Israel, I say periphery like nothing's periphery. It's usually the first time I went to visit Ronnie Malik, I was, wow, this really is the periphery. It's such a pain to get to. I went up to take him for dinner September of last year, since I'm here so much, and I was like, it took like 3 hours to get there.
It's good. That way, when they're isolated there, they can just study and do what they're supposed to be
Exactly,
doing
that's the theory,
rather than
right?
coming to Tel Aviv.
Yeah, but no, it's been a good experience for him also to see some of the attitudes out there. Um, but on the whole, it's a relatively sane campus. I don't know if
You mentioned before about kind of um, the top-down approach of China and Abu Dhabi is being effective. We talked about kind of Lena Khan. We talked about that the Israeli government needs to get its act together on regulation. One of the things that struck me is the Trump administration that's coming together right now has put people we both know into real positions of power out of the business community, the tech
Really
community,
great people.
really great people. But this is a new model. I don't recall in my 53 years around and 35 or so years following politics, a collection of this many successful business and technology people taking roles in government. You know, the flip side of it may be they may get there and just be totally lost in the bureaucracy and not know how to, be a plumber or an engineer of
Right.
these bureaucracies. But I wonder what you think about
The deep
this.
state.
Yeah.
No, it's great to see, and my politics is I don't know what my politics are anymore, to be honest. I'm so confused. I think a lot of people are confused given events in America, Israel, and the world. But just focusing on individuals, these are phenomenal, phenomenal people that you and I are friends with that are going there, and I wish them great success. It's great for America. It's great for Israel, but I think some of them will figure it out.
Some will figure out, and some of them will just
I hope
bang their
they'll
head
figure
against the
out
wall and say,
if any people can figure out, I think it's the people that you are referring to because they are just so talented, and they've been talented at doing many different things, which is, I think, what you need. But it's really encouraging to see
Frank
them going
Bosniano,
in.
CEO of Pfizer, running Social Security, Scott Bessent now
Yeah,
going to
great
run
people. Scott's
Treasury.
phenomenal.
Yeah,
Having Scott there is just a great thing for the United States.
yeah, it's super
He's
encouraging.
he's 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 he was an incredible candidate. I'm very happy he got it, and he will be a phenomenal, phenomenal Secretary of the Treasury. I'm very happy for him.
All right, and the last thing I have to ask you, even though they told me I should ask it first, but I decided not to.
I've dodged a few questions, so let's.
Were you nervous sitting in the seat?
Well, I don't see 100 people. You know, when my kids have their bar bat mitzvahs, well, let's go back to like when they're born. The deal I had with my wife is you speak at the Simchat Bat or the Brit Milah, and then you like do the final choice of the name, so I don't have to speak in front of the room. So, you know,
You know what told me I had to ask you that? You said you're a great guy, but you're probably going to feel nervous. Tom Knights.
that's funny. Yeah, he made me speak at some embassy convening here, which is why my wife says I only speak publicly in the Middle East, never in New York.
Senator, thank you very much. I
Thank
want to
you.
say thank you for two things. First, doing your first podcast, and two, leaving out the embarrassing stories about me.
We'll do those next and the outtakes. Thanks very much.
If you enjoyed this podcast, please rate us 5 stars on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, Stitcher, wherever you listen to podcasts. And please share the episode. There are just incredible insights from Senator. And because this is his first episode, we need to make it the most popular episode of Invested ever. Thanks.